definitely going to give peace a chance during this period. And very well, but they tried, E for effort, because after what people went through in the Great War, you can hardly blame them for getting very, very interested in ideas that really started in the 19th century. The ideas, that is, of peacekeeping. I was reading today, for example, about Andrew Carnegie and his International Endowment for Peace. It's good to have money, a lot of money. Even though some people might have criticized his methods of making money and have said some pretty nasty things about Andrew Carnegie, but when we think of the libraries and so forth, we have to admit that his ill-gotten gains were often spent in worthy causes. And in addition to that which I mentioned, we're also aware, or should be, about The Hague and the International Court of Justice, which actually was built by his money, well, the money he gave, and that organization was in action before World War I. Sad, isn't it? When you think about how they were already making efforts to try to maintain international peace before the war. I guess they didn't decide to bring the Kaiser up for crimes and misdemeanors that early, but there was, and there still are, ongoing cases there. I'm thinking some of you will remember the Rwanda situation in the 1990s, the Liberian situation a bit later, the situation in Southeastern Europe in the 1990s, Serbia and all the rest of it. All of that in The Hague, but let's face it, I don't think most of us have been breathing in this world when there wasn't war somewhere. But that doesn't mean that people can't go on and try to do something about it, even though wars are going to go on. And we have one now. Specifically, this business of Locarno. And if you happen to go to Switzerland sometime and you get tired of Zurich and Bern and Geneva, and you want something a little more rural, you miss Valley or somewhere, our favorite rural places, check out Locarno. You can get nice hotels and various kinds of accommodations there. It's close to the Italian border, and Italian is actually the language of choice there. And it's right there on the lake, Lake Maggiore. And so it's a very, very beautiful place. I guess that's one reason they met there. It's not really in the auspices of the League of Nations, but I'm sure the League of Nations was happy about it when they decided to meet. I suspect they met there because it was so near the boss. Some people use that term for some rock and roll singer, but I use it to refer to the disgusting Benito Mussolini, the fascist. Sorry about that. But the fact is that he was right across the lake, and it was said that they were very interested in trying to get him involved so he could hit the water and cross over on his boat, and which he did at one point. They wanted to get everyone involved, including the Italians. But of course, this is primarily Franco German business, but many others are involved because let's remember this is 1925. So it's just been 6 years. It's like, I don't know about you, but when I think about 6 years, it's just like yesterday. And when I'm thinking about these folks having gotten through the Great War, I'm thinking any kind of improvements in relationships is certainly well worth the effort. And that was certainly true for the two men of the hour. These both died. I think Stresemann died at the end of the 1920s, 1929, and Briand died, I think, in 1937. But the idea is they are the two most significant people of this particular period in terms of trying to somehow bring France and Germany and the rest of the neighborhood into some sort of an agreement, some sort of way in which they could learn to live together. And that's not going to be easy, but the media of the day certainly believed that sitting down and going for canoe rides around the lake and, having a little wine or, that sort of a nice meal or that sort of thing there at Locarno, maybe that would help relations. I mean, of course, there was a lot of talk, but there was still a kind of atmosphere of being festive. And of course, their neutral hosts were only too glad to assist them. Stresemann, who luckily got to die before the Third Reich, so he did not have to bear that, was determined that the Germans were going to come out of this ahead because he was very crafty. I mean, he wanted peace because Germany could not obtain its goals through war. They tried that, and that hadn't worked for them. So now they were going to try the peace route. But the idea was we have to accept our boundaries in the West. And then we have peace with France and Belgium. Because then the French and Belgians can accept us. And of course, the idea is that Briand and the Belgian minister says, now, how do we know you're going to be good? You've been bad so often. How can we know you're bad? Oh, well, we'll be backed up by the British and Italians. So the agreement's going to be basically that, well, they didn't say the Germans were the bad. Said if either side disrupts the boundaries, but we know who they're talking about. But if the Germans were to disrupt the boundaries, then the French and the Italians say, well, we'll step in. So the idea is there's a guarantee, a sort of backup. And we'll say now, Hans, you get away from there. You don't do that. That's very naughty. So you just keep moving. But that's the idea of the protection that the Italians and the British were going to give. So whether or not it's going to work, they hope the best. However, it was a matter of the eastern borders with the newer countries, Czechoslovakia think you've heard about that one. And Poland. Well, that's not new, but it's in a newer version. Okay. It's in the 1919 version. It's been around before. But in both cases, Stresemann's going to say, you know, we can't give the same kinds of guarantees. They need to be negotiated and discussed further. But let me put it this way, and we put this in the agreement. We won't do it with anything ugly or bad. We'll do it through discussions and with you Polish and Czech folks, because you know, but nothing that will be ugly or involve hurting people. It'll just be through discussions, a lot of group work, I guess you would say. We'll do projects together, the Czech, Polish, German project. And then that was the idea. And Stresemann found it very amusing that basically the Czechs, and of course, you know, the one who was there. Yeah, he was always there, Mr. Benish. He was Mr. Czechoslovakia, so he never missed a meeting. So he was there. But the Pole and the Czech didn't get to come in until later on. You know, it's like we have a backup appointment. We can work you in after we finish at lunch. I mean, that's hurtful. I'm glad we don't know any sensitive Czechs, but that was, yeah, these people had to be pretty strong to face, oh yeah, we said we would talk to you too, but you'll be okay, you know, just don't mess with us. And then we'll get through this and talk it. So that's what I meant by the Eastern Locarno, because I guarantee you borders, no way, okay? Ain't no way, in the words of Aretha Franklin, if you remember the song, yeah, it's not going to happen. This is the cartoon that I just loved because it's not, I hope it's clear that you can see beyond, you can see shorter than I am. You see, probably too many of those good dinners there at Locarno. And you look at old Stresemann behind him. Now, who's that with the pen? That's Sir Austen Chamberlain, who was very famous British statesman. You know, the kid brother Neville. Yeah. But this is the big boy, Sir Austen, who, and their father was a very famous statesman as well. But everybody's signing up, getting excited about Locarno. And you say, now, who's the pipe smoker? I think that's Uncle Sam, don't you? Because it's like he's watching them and saying, y'all, that's great. I'm really happy for y'all. And I want to wish you the best. It's like, you know, don't have anything to do with it. I'm not spending any of my money, but I'm glad for y'all because you have been a lot of trouble to the United States. And so finally, you're working out your own problems. And behind them would be, I suppose, the Belgian leader who was there. Remember the Belgians, we can't leave them out. They're there, definitely. And Benito Mussolini actually did come over by motorboat for the signing. That's a true story. He came across the lake, although, you know, it's like he just wanted to show up. And I guess for, you know, when they take the picture, they always want to do that, want to get the annual. So he wanted to be in the Locarno yearbook, you know. I was there, ciao, baby, you know, that kind of thing. That's Mussolini loved to get those photographs of himself. So yeah, think about how he would have enjoyed Facebook. Can you imagine? He would have every day a new posting. Could you imagine? Because he was very vain.
Who's that on top of the pen?
That's our Austin Chamberlain. I'm sorry, who's on the
Face? On top of the pen.
on top of the pen?
With a eraser. What is that?
I really don't know. I'm sorry, Jane. Yeah, but that's Sir Austin Chamberlain using it. It would be, but that's a very good question. I don't know. I just thought the cartoon, the idea of everybody lining up and, you know, we're all, now they didn't sign all of this at Locarno. They made the agreements and then they went to London later in the year, you know, around Christmas time of 1925. So they were the formal agreements, but I'm more interested in just the getting together and the talk about Briand and Stresemann having the canoe rides. And of course, the evil tobacco, they would, of course, have cigars and, you know, all the things that you would think people do. But here you got a German and a Frenchman doing it. And so you can imagine all the media that were around them who were saying, oh, wow, this is history of the making and that sort of thing. I remember being dragged to the television by my family, you know, watch this, this is history. You need to know that, you know, oh, I want, you know, being troublesome teenager. Oh, I don't want to, but yeah, I mean, I know, funny. So if you were there, you could even get a postcard. Yes. Remember postcards? Remember when we always had having a wonderful time in Locarno? It's that kind of thing because you can imagine. And it would be like hotel rates last weekend in Oxford, wouldn't it? I heard. I don't want to call them pirates or wicked people, but it's true that hotel rates where their SEC football games can get ugly. Okay. And I don't mean the Waldorf Astoria either. I mean just basic places. And in this case, I'm sure any place that was in the Locarno area, I think they call it jacking them up. Is that right? So that is the idea that was going on around Locarno, because you think it's just these individuals. Oh no, we have the entourage and families and all kinds of administrative staff. Maybe not as bad as nowadays, but it was bad for the day. And also, of course, we never forget, even in that day and age, the media. And they are there from New York to London and everywhere else. You can actually follow all this in the New York Times. I mean, it was quite the event. And you can see photographs of the various places, and you say, having a wonderful time in Locarno, great day for peace. I always tell the students that's a wonderful thing that we are not given the knowledge of knowing the future, because they could go right on Locarno and think, wow, this is wonderful. What is it they say? We're making history. Give peace a chance, you know, and all the rest of it. It's just the way that I guess we want things to be. But you can see the pictures. You see Sir Austin Chamberlain, he's number 2, because he always wore those British type glasses, little spectacles. And there's Germany, there's Stresemann, and there's Belgium, and he could be right annoying socialist, he was. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, he would always sort of like everybody's trying to be so nice and friendly. And he said, now, wait just a minute. Let's talk this. One of those. Instead of saying, we're just glad to be here and we really like y'all and all that. I think the Belgians had their own concerns. There it is. I mean, I didn't lie. I think it's, yeah. I mean, I love Panama City. I love all the wonderful places that we have. But if they forced us to go to Switzerland, yeah, I mean, dragged us away, not on Swiss Air, didn't they? That's dead and they passed on. But maybe Delta flies to, no. Okay. I'm way, way behind in my airline knowledge. The idea being, of course, that it's a very pretty place. And again, right across the lake, here comes Benito. Yeah. And then we can pose and get our photographs and like, we're all into peace, ciao, baby, and all of that. So that was going on in 1925 to the very end of the year. And I might add that Winston Churchill said, well, he makes the trains in Italy run on time. And I know he does some things that we British don't approve of, but hey, these are Italians. They run differently. So Mussolini in 1925 is not the objectionable figure that we think of him as being, but that's going to happen. But it just hadn't happened yet, at least not to the extent that it will. Now, what is Germany going to get out of this? Well, it's going to get a lot out of it because while the British and French, or rather the French and Belgians, still have, shall we say, problems with the Germans, and they don't bring it up in any ugly way at Locarno, but there is no question that the British, in some ways like the Americans, are actually saying, maybe those history books are right, because as people were writing the history books already about World War I, they were beginning to say, and this is in the 1920s, they were beginning to say, all of the powers caused the Great War. And so they were all equally guilty, that kind of thing. It was not, certainly when I came along, they had returned to, it was all the Germans. They caused the war, blah, blah, blah. But not at this stage, at least in the English-speaking world. The British felt they had sort of been hooked into it, and the Americans as well. That if the French and Russians hadn't been so aggressive against the Germans wouldn't have done what they did. So what this does is an attempt to parcel out, you might say, the blame. And as such, then maybe the Germans are not so bad after all. And this is from the British perspective. And meanwhile, the Germans are withdrawing themselves from the Rhineland. I pointed out that it does occur in stages. And you'll recall, I trust from last time, that the stages came about, or the whole purpose of the French and Belgians being in there was, of course, a question of reparations, because the Germans had been slow. So French and Belgians say, well, we'll just take our reparations. And you know how that would lead to the massive inflation and all the rest of it. So now, thanks to Locarno, and in part thanks to British pressures, because I don't think the British the French and the Belgians really wanted to, but they left grudgingly, thinking those Germans will never get it out of them unless we force them. And they're probably right, because the Germans were not happy about paying reparations. You'll recall they needed the money at home. In any event, you see Cologne up there, up in the northwest. So you see from that area, and those French and Belgian forces will leave and trust that the Weimar government, Stresemann and others, I guess you'd say the era of good feelings, that you are going now to be cooperative and we can all do this together. Briand was an interesting character, no doubt about that. Won the Nobel Peace Prize, and during his life was involved in many French governments. They would say about people like this, he might not be the premier in all the different governments, but he was there somewhere. It's the way they make up their governments. Well, those of you know about parliamentary governments will know how all this works. It's not just the French. It's all of these days. Israel is not that different. You have coalitions of parties and all the rest. He was a socialist and very much committed to maintaining the best relationship he could with the Germans, because, of course, there's always that German birth rate versus the French birth rate, meaning that the Germans keep on growing and we don't. So that means that something's got to give. We've got to maintain ourselves. And the best way to do that is finding some way to learn to live next to you. It is interesting to note also that he was a very passionate enemy of the church. Being a socialist, and he was definitely mature at the time of the Dreyfus affair. You know, late in the 19th century, the affair in which they discovered that they had misconvicted a Jewish officer and actually was a Catholic. So all of that had powerful influence on him. So I guess by 1905 or so, the French created what would be a total separation of church and state. And many of you who grew up in the United States remember when they read the Bible to us in public school and we didn't think a thing about, if you didn't happen to agree, it was your tough luck. But not in France. Boy, howdy, 1905. When they start pulling those crucifixes down, but I thought Sister Mary Ann was gonna be, no, not anymore. You can't wear your habit in here. These are French public schools. So it was a very, very big change if you think about it, and Briand was connected with that as well. So I just pull that in just to make you aware, I guess, that there's so many issues that are not related to the relationship with Germany, even though in our case, that's what we're concerned with. But he was quite an interesting character. And if he could sit down and canoe ride with Stresemann and say, now let's go have some noodles or, some sort of German dish, and we can toast with some lager from Munich or something. I mean, it's like that's got to be tough, but he could do it, and with the best of them. And as a matter of fact, he will present. This was a big moment. I always bring out the drum roll. Brings the nomination of Germany to be a member. I mean, this is like Rush. This is like a bid session during Rush. I mean, it's like, really? When they went through before, they didn't get it. Came close, but didn't get it. But no, seriously, this is what Stresemann, had been dreaming of. Now we've made it. Of course, now we're not just going to be an ordinary member. We're Germany. So we've got to be a member of the Security Council of the UN today, the top members. And, in that you will have, well, they've got a World War II type group at the UN, but that's another story. In this case, it would be the major nations, and then the rest would be rotating members like Czechoslovakia. No offense. It's just that it's not a major power. It's a wonderful power, which is different than major.
Little on time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're part of a little on time. And little is good. But yeah, it's the idea that when the Germans were conferring, and they said, we will be part of the major group, won't we? And he said, we. So they were invited in. Get on that train to Geneva. Yeah, from Berlin. Take the train over, and that is being greeted. And I can assure you that it was a speech. I mean, Germany's here. We want to be part of it. And this is 1926. I know. And you say, oh, but I thought the Nazis are coming. Yeah, but they don't know that. Remember, things look good. This is 1926. I tell you, it's good people don't know the future. So often we think, oh, I wish I knew what was going to happen next year. I said, no, you don't. No, let's just enjoy it now, because that's what I consider when I think of this, because they were impressed, and you could see all the people, all of the clerks and administrators and staff listening and realizing what a major day this was. By the way, one of the great powers involved was Brazil, which I think is interesting because it is, but they were very active, very significant part of the league, which you may not have known. It's like, it wasn't just Europeans, but it was mainly. Now the Germans are in, and they will be in for the next, so 1933. Yeah, and that'll be the end of that. Why did Stresemann want it to be? Why did he want them in the league? Well, according to a letter of his, and you can take this for what it's worth, because sometimes we say things in, well, I guess nowadays, emails or telephone calls. And maybe later we say, well, I didn't really mean that. I just said it for effect or whatever. But this is what he said in a letter to a friend, that he thought this would help the Germans with their economic issues like that of reparations. It would help them with the issue of the 10 million German ethnic people. And don't think about how many German ethnic people did not live in Germany, living, for example, in Czechoslovakia, Ibiza, and Poland. Yes. Call it what it is. This is Sudetenland. But I mean, there are others, Latvia, Lithuania, all up in the north, just loads of those Germans. And growing all the time, too. And then finally, making changes in the East. That sort of business that Stresemann was reluctant to spell out at Locarno. Apparently, he was willing to do it in correspondence. And that is, changes need to be made. Some serious changes, especially in that blankety blank Polish corridor, because that was infuriating to them, as we are going to see. And the status of the international city of Damascus, and then, Danzig, I'm sorry, and of course, Austria. All of these are issues that he hoped to find ways to settle. And of course, number 4, just basically, we can't use military means. Even though we are developing a military force in Russia, Soviet Union, we're not ready for prime time, as they say. We will be someday, but we're not. We need to do these things. We need to work on these issues. And we can do it through the League of Nations. That was the big deal. Because now we're big stuff. And people know it. I mean, they hurt us really badly. They're back there at the treaty, in June of 1919. But we're back. And we're bad. We're tough. Yeah, exactly. Now, this is Weimar, 1926, so I don't want to, don't want to get us too far along, but we definitely understand that now that they're going to be a major power once again. Now you say, oh, did someone cancel all their debts? I think not. Oh, no. You're going to pay your reparations. Did you put that check in the mail, or did you forget? That will become a problem. Gosh, it slipped my mind. I'll try to get you something, get you a little something extra next month. It's like, yeah, that's going to be an issue, but no, they want their money. Those French and Belgians definitely are expecting it. Now, I love these journal pictures. This is Briand, you see, Petit Journal Illustré. That is supposed to show the various nations, and you see Briand at the end because he becomes one of the symbols of, international peace movement as led by the French Third Republic, and Briand, socialist, and dare I say, free thinker. Yeah. Can't expect him at Mass. So don't even try to leave a place on the pew. He isn't going to be there. But here, of course, is where one of his great, great efforts will take place. And it's a very strange, in many ways, effort, because it had everything to do with France and the United States, and will create, as far as the United States is concerned, great concern about its international reputation and the nature of its commitment. We all know that Briand was a symbol of international peace, had that reputation. But many of us would not know this man. I mean, I could show you many photographs of secretaries of state, and you would instantly know them. Henry Kissinger, General Powell. I mean, there are a bunch of secretaries of state you know. This one, I'm not so sure. I'm not denying your intellectual capabilities. They're all there. But it's been a long time, and don't go around the streets asking people to name the secretaries of state from the 1920s. Don't. I mean, it could get you into trouble. I don't want you hurt, either verbally or physically. But yes, I like to stop people and ask them questions about cabinet members, but I do it and then I can make a run for it before they say, "Punk, you try that again." No, seriously, this guy is so interesting to me because as far as I'm aware, he was all self-educated. He came from a poor family that moved from New York to Minnesota, worked in the fields with the family, and you could, back in that day and age, get your law degree if you had read the law and you learned all this. I can't believe you hear about examples, people back then. I guess he was born in 1856. So standards were different, but he made it big. He became a senator from Minnesota, and he was ambassador to Great Britain. And finally, Secretary of State. So this is Frank B. Kellogg. It was the relationship as a major Republican that, and his, I'm sure, career with being ambassador to Britain that caused him to be nominated by Calvin Coolidge. Now, this could be on the final. Who was his predecessor? Do you know, Jane?
That's a Kennedy, is that right?
No, he's got three names. C-E-H. Passing. I'm
Evans Hughes.
Bang, bang. Order in the court. I'm a failure. I'm a failure. You want to go give me a bad
No,
evaluation?
Hughes.
Okay. Yes, that was it.
Charles Evans Hughes.
Yes.
Yeah.
See. Okay. My hints are not as good as they used to be. Which one?
Was it Kennedy? Ambassador to Great
Kennedy.
Joe Kennedy?
That was in 1930.
Oh, no, that was in the 30s. Yeah. Charles Evans Hughes. And he went on to, be Chief Justice. But Kellogg took his place because remember that Charles Evans Hughes was there at the time of the Washington Naval Conference and all that. So now he's got it. And believe it or not, he had what some people would call a potty mouth. He used bad words. I mean, I'm sure Mrs. Kellogg's not around, but when she wasn't around, he would, words that we would not use in our genteel circles. But some of you know, but again, he did a lot that was good. He accomplished quite a bit. So who am I to knock a nasty talk when you have this kind of career? He went on. Hoover appointed him as American judge on the International Court of Justice at The Hague, and he died after that. But anyway, he had a brilliant career, no doubt about that. So What have Briand and Kellogg to do with all this? Well, I will tell you. Briand, there in Paris, was getting lots of visits and lots of calls and lots of letters from leaders of American pacifist organizations. And they presumably were bilingual. And always it was about give peace a chance. We can do more for international peace. And we love France. I mean, we know Statue of Liberty, Lafayette, we're here, etc. So Franco-American, I mean, it's just, we need to reach out and touch. No, I'm not going to sing. But again, I know the song, you do too. But we get the idea that the pacifists were pushing Briand in the direction that he wanted to be pushed. Because you know what everybody wants, commitment. What are you going to do? Are we just going to talk peace? Or are we going to get in there and actually do something about it? And that's what they wanted Briand to do. So oddly to me, Briand will actually go about writing in newspapers like the New York Times to the American people. We in France will never forget all the wonderful things you did during the unpleasantry of 10 years ago. Gosh, it's hard to believe, time flies. It's been 10 years, and we were so glad to help you all in your struggle for freedom against the British. We were happy to give you the Statue of Liberty. I mean, we just got a wonderful relationship. Très bon. Yeah. So it's all of that. And of course, you think, what do you want? What do you want? Come on. And of course, what they want is, it's a kind of entente. It's kind of a statement saying that we won't go to war with each other. We really care very much about you, France. Do you like us, Americans? Yes, we do. Je t'aime, je t'aime. You know, it's like, this is the kind of idea that was forming. And what was in Briand's mind, really? People have argued about that for a long time. I know you'll find it hard to believe, but there are whole books on the subject of this Kellogg-Briand Pact. Books, hundreds of pages for those really, really slow weekends. And you think there's nothing left to do. You could read a 300-page book on the Kellogg-Briand Pact. And I mean, yeah, but it is that idea that the French want to get some sort of commitment. Remember, they had failed 10 years before because the Americans, Woodrow Wilson, along with Lloyd George, had sort of strung the French along with that sort of like, yeah, now those Germans, if they act ugly, we're going to be there. Not so much. That was pretty much over by the end of 1919. If indeed, for the Americans, since they did never agree to that treaty with the League of Nations in it, they never agreed to protect the French. So now, if we can get this Franco-American agreement, we can make it mean what we need for it to mean. what we want it to mean. I know it's sort of like, well, you said you cared about me. I mean, is it just friendship or is there something more to it? Yeah, I know it. I think that is what Briand was trying so hard to do. And if he was, Kellogg was probably using some ugly words over the telephone. I bet he was. But to himself, I hope. I'm sure he was talking ugly to Monsieur Briand. But thinking, yeah, right. But because neither Coolidge nor Briand wanted any specific commitment. Because we know in our own situation, well, I mean, you look at the news, always when people have troubles, they want commitments. You can't just say, well, we wish you all the very best. I mean, I put that in the annuals when you were in school. But if they came to you and said, I'm so glad you asked me you gave me all your good wishes and best regards, because now I need reparations. Remember, you were ugly to me that day in school. It's like, it doesn't work that way, does it? But in international relations, I'm not so sure. In this case, Briand actually hoped that he could, over time, presumably, get some sort of understanding that if either of us have a problem, I guess if the Canadians come down and we face Canadian threat, the French will come help us. Right. Yeah. All the way from Toronto. Yeah. And then, no, the idea being that American support for the French against the Germans. And we all know that's not very likely in the case of this period. And so Coolidge / Kellogg decide, we love you very much. And we love you so much. Give peace a chance. No hippies, but the idea being that let's all embrace peace. Can you imagine what Briand is thinking? Like, God, this man is horrible. Because the idea is we can make it a general agreement denouncing war. And you're going like, well, now how's that going to help France? Good question. Good. Very, very good. But that's what Kellogg was trying to avoid. He was trying to avoid any specific commitment on the part of the United States and instead come out with a general statement that would encourage peace among the powers. When the agreement was made, called the Kellogg-Briand Pact, people loved it. Democrats, Republicans, independents, everybody said, this is wonderful. Give peace. We love peace. We're very anti-war. One senator said it was baloney. An isolationist from Idaho. Try that in your Trivial Pursuit contest. Few will know it, but the idea being that, yes, it was very, and I mean, because it's like, could you imagine someone coming along in the Hallmark place, the Hallmark store, and saying, "That's a card if you hate your mother. I want a card like that." There's no horrible people like that. Well, who's going to denounce? Who's going to denounce internet? I mean, it's like a lot of those senators actually admitted it. I was afraid to go home if I voted against it. Because that's like everybody likes the idea. I don't know whether it would go over nowadays, but it certainly did in the 1920s. This Kellogg-Briand Pact. And I mean to tell you that when it was finally signed, and it wasn't signed until the administration of Herbert Hoover in 1929, but it went through all the stages. And you can see this idea of the signing ceremony at the Quai d'Orsay in Paris. You can just imagine how Briand. Oh, there were even commies there. Yes. You say, they let them in? Oh, yeah. Reds can come. What did those commies, what did they do? They signed up peace, all about peace. Yeah, right. I mean, who's opposed? Mussolini signed, everybody. Yeah, man, peace is cool. We're in, that's the Kellogg-Briand Pact. There weren't many countries in the world because everybody got an invitation. I mean, you didn't have to be special. Virtually every power got an invitation. And if you didn't get to sign up in Paris, you could probably sign up, later. But virtually every country signed this. And basically what it did, and it was designed, in fact, by lawyers. And I mean, some of my best friends are lawyers. So, I mean, your lawyers are nice people, I'm sure. But it basically made war illegal. So that can be, could you imagine if they did that now? Could you imagine the advertising? But back then they didn't have advertising lawyers. So different time. So basically the idea was the illegality of war. So if you went to war, then you were committing an illegal act. Because it was the most simple thing in the world. And you say, well, what happens if you do that? You're bad. Maybe we'll come cuff you, read you your rights, and you'll have to wear a non-Auburn orange. I mean, something like, I'm not our orange. No, that's Tennessee orange. Something ugly. But yeah, that's the idea, though, in the Quai d'Orsay, that's basically all they're signing up for, because there's not like, you'll be in trouble, you'll get in trouble, you'll get a demerit, or, it's sort of like military school of nations. Yeah, you can, your hand gets hurt or slapped. It's like, here it is, specifically. Not use war to resolve conflicts. I mean, you can almost make your children do that when they're little. You sign this, a peace, and because sometimes they can be a right belligerent, I've heard, and not in part of the pro-peace movement. Yes, they've got that, and you say, you're just going to have to sign up on the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Yes, and we'll fix you. So that is the idea. And this just kills me. The second part says, should be denied the benefits furnished by the treaty. What does that mean? I don't know. Read insurance policy. Sometimes it just gets difficult to understand what sort of baloney they are saying here, because it really doesn't mean a great deal. But I think it means like, we don't like you anymore. You're a pariah. And you don't want to be a pariah, because we all want you to be part of us. So to be a pariah, though, is a frightening thought. So the idea is, and look at the peace angel, and look at that skirt on her. I think that's hilarious, because that is so 20s, isn't it? But the idea being that she's kind of modernized. She's gone 20th century. So she's all that, but she's into peace. No war. And go Kellogg-Briand. And of course, we know poor Briand's going, sacre bleu. Because you know he could not have been happy. Because, okay, now you sign. And you have to sit through all of that. And you're thinking, this is really not what I had in mind. Obviously, it went into effect in that fateful year, 1929. And you say, well, isn't that a bit ironic? Yes, I think it is. I think it is very ironic when you stop and think we've come to the end of the 1920s. And of course, we definitely have a very, very, what's that?
Another peace prize.
Another peace prize. Oh, yes. We're going to have Kellogg get that peace prize. But here are all the areas that signed, of course. You see our friends in Canada. Yeah, oh, yeah. And Soviet Union, can't wait. Trip to Paris. Oh, everybody's signing. I mean, and of course, a lot of these are colonies. You remember that. She said, oh, that's great. That makes me sad. We can't sign because we're having a little war. We wish we could, but right, maybe later when we get finished beating up on somebody, then we can sign the anti-war, but not yet. I mean, it cracks me up to thinking about the ones who can't sign, but we don't want to be too hypocritical. Sign the Kellogg-Briand while you're having a war against somebody. So there were so many wars in Latin America, as you can see, from Mexico on down. But as you can see, otherwise, most of the world was involved. The portrait that is being done by a famous French portrait painter is part of what you might say the cult of Kellogg. And again, something you can show off your Ollie knowledge to your friends. But believe me, you will know about this. And they're going to go, wow, you are so educated. Or else leave me alone, maybe. Or something. You'll get some kind of response. I'm sure of that. But anyway, it was a famous portrait painter of the day. And this one, I don't know if you can see it. Maybe I should have made it wider.
Yeah, I didn't realize.
But it looks like what you see there, if you can see it, I hope you can, is it shows you the baby, and the baby is the League of Nations. And France is carrying the baby around, and Uncle Sam is touring with Fifi. And so, yeah, I know. And we're thinking, why isn't he with the baby? And that's a good question. So the idea, of course, is you come over here to sign the Kellogg-Briand Pact, but your love child, the League of Nations, yeah. So you're not a good father. So that is the idea. I just thought it was amusing in the sense that people would always remember that it was Woodrow Wilson's baby, number 14 points. So you could say that he was responsible for it, if you wish. And I'm sure if you were to go to the league back in that day, his portrait would have been there, and the Woodrow Wilson room, and so forth and so on. But in fact, of course, they were there, and then back to the airport, we got to go home. And by the way, you might find it interesting, speaking of flying, that we never forget that Charles Lindbergh flew into France in this period, and that was very connected to this Franco-American connection, because from what I've read, the French just love Lindbergh and we're very excited by all of this. And you think, what's that got to do with politics? Oh, I think the media could take care of that. He went through the streets of Paris and he was idolized. So Briand is watching all of this very carefully and say, we love you so much, Lindy, and we love America. I mean, it makes you just want to get Kate Smith here to sing America. I mean, yeah, we could really do this up. But yes, aviation's very involved here in this particular matter. So, all of this then, as of 1928, things look good. I know it's not perfect. You remember that Hoover defeated Al Smith. We know our presidential elections, so we know how that went. And Hoover was the president. He was not, by the way, an admirer of his predecessor, Calvin Coolidge. I do not choose to run. And so, though he was a Republican, like his predecessor, Hoover was sad after a career of, leading so many things, like the great effort, on behalf of the people of Belgium and France during the war, a brilliant career as an engineer from Stanford, all of these things. But that, of course, is not what he is remembered for. Yes, to hear about that when I was growing up. And the famous thing was saying, like, well, you think you can get that, but when I was growing up, I didn't have things because the depression got over and over again. I know that many of you had similar experiences. And of course, a supporter of Herbert Hoover was hard to find in my town in Georgia. I can promise you that. If I had gone around and said, did any of you all vote for Herbert Hoover in 1932? I think I would have stayed away and run, because I don't think that was going to happen, right? The idea being, of course, that there was great change that would occur in the late 1920s and early 1930s. A lot of people don't realize that the change did take place between Coolidge and Hoover. A book came out some years ago. You may have read it. It's called Herbert Hoover, Forgotten Progressive. And a lot of people don't realize that he represents, in many ways, a transition from the old-fashioned, Republican idea of rugged individualism, and we don't want any government interference, and we don't want any of that. And suddenly, Hoover, believe it or not, supports government intervention in a number of issues, not like FDR, but still beginning of government involvement in business and agriculture and labor, but just not individualism. So we know that, and we know, ironically, that just as all of this is taking place, the so-called Young Plan will come about. The Young Plan, and you see the years, 1929 to 1930, are basically the years that it was developed. what had happened was essentially the Dawes Plan had so many areas of concern that this economist and businessman, very prominent businessman, as we'll see, decided that the payments had been too large. It's like, we'll give you a new payment plan. And instead of paying for the next 100 years, you can pay for 200 years. But the payments will be smaller, affordable. That's the idea. And all of this was worked out. I mean, he had worked on the original plan, this fellow Young, and he was quite the successful businessman, the founder of RCA. And not everyone today will know about RCA because that's been gone, but in the day of many of us, that was a very big deal. So this was not somebody who grew up in the woods or was hoeing and picking. I mean, he, Yale and the whole bit. So he grew up in wonderful circumstances. And as a brilliant economist, international businessman, undoubtedly his companies were involved in the financing of the German government. Because remember, that's a significant part of this. Because don't think the British and French aren't still complaining about paying war debts, because they are. Nobody likes it, but somehow it has to be done. So they're saying to the Germans, well, we're going to get you a new system. And all of this is supposed to make everybody happy. Well, just as they're about to unveil it, a little something called the Depression comes along. And it kind of slows, shall we say, the progress of the Young plan. Oh, yeah, see, he was quite the star. I guess when you make the cover of Time, you're a big deal. And the idea was that this new plan would work, but you know what time period we are in? We're in the 30s now. And guess what? The Germans don't want to pay reparations anymore. And what are you going to do about it? That's where you are. So the Young plan is sort of dead in the water, isn't it? Because and guess what? I don't think the British and French are going to say, well, you don't worry, America. Your checks are going to be in the mail right on. Yes, sir. No more checks. Everybody is stopping and paying. So it's like all of this had gone on during that first decade after the war, but believe you me, those days are over. So the Young plan, so to speak, is dead in the water. There is the one major event that many of us will know about, because when John F. Kennedy became president, the first notion of having an ambassador to the Vatican would be brought up, certainly not approved. I believe it was not until Ronald Reagan, if memory serves, that we had an actual ambassador to the Vatican. People would go, oh, shocking that we would do that. But at this time, there was the actual recognition of the Vatican as a separate city. It's hard to believe, but the popes had remained as voluntary prisoners of the Italian government. We hate you. You're excommunicated. Damn you. And you say, well, those are hurtful words. Well, they hurt us too. They took over Rome. Go to Rome. This all used to, you've been there. It's like all of this used to be ours. I'm the Pope. If I were, I can drink. So the idea being that now we finally accept it. From, I might add, an atheist, one-time socialist named Benito Mussolini, boss. And it's like, what a strange pair. Pius XI and Benito Mussolini in this concordant. But I always say, give credit where credit is due, or whatever the cliche is. But it's like they did achieve it. And I always like to say, I mean, it doesn't mean we love you. And St. Peter is just sends a big kiss for you. No, I don't think so. But it's a necessity. The whole Vatican area, and many of you have toured there, and thought it was very exciting when I got my stamps there at Vatican City and all of that. Mailing a postcard to somebody for having fun in Vatican City. Wish you were here. That kind of thing. I mean, pretty corny. I get it. But yeah, you have the idea, though, that it seemed like a major success, and it was. And I'm sure it added to ratemyduce.com. People could say, yeah, look at Mussolini, he broke through. I mean, of course, all the credit goes to the king, but everybody knows it was Mussolini's regime that brought it about. And finally, today, I thought I would mention something that we all hear about and have heard about over the years, the Geneva Convention. And there have been many Geneva Conventions, haven't there? It's so funny, but this one is the one that everybody knows, whether or not it actually is or has meaning. Most have signed it. It was in effect and is in effect as of 1931. It's interesting to think that it's never been ratified by the Soviet Union but presumably all other major powers. I don't know if the North Koreans accept it, but yeah, we won't worry about that. But you understand the idea of the rights of the prisoners and all of the various parts of the Geneva Convention. I just thought it was interesting that came about during this period. And of course, we never forget Geneva, because that's where so many of these agreements are made. And that was as of 1929, and just a few months before the stock market crash, right? So, I mean, all of this is going on simultaneously. So we will start next time with Japan and how it is involved in the troubles of the West, along with the United States in European diplomacy. So we'll pick up there next time. Thank you for your attention.